Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, December 4th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israel bombs tent camp in Gaza, killing 5. So Israeli strikes hit the Al-Mawasi tent camp near Khan Yunis in southern Gaza on Wednesday as Israel continues its attacks on Palestinians in the Strip despite the U.S.-backed ceasefire deal. So according to the Palestinian news agency Rafah, Israeli warplanes launched a series of strikes on tents used by displaced Palestinians in Al-Mawasi, killing at least 5 people, including 2 children, and wounding dozens of others. Medical sources said the bodies that were recovered at the site had severe burns. So Israel is still incinerating people in tents, incinerating children in tents, paid for by the U.S. government. And you can see this video here. This is footage from the Anadolu agency. You can see some of the fires on the tents, people trying to put them out with buckets of water. And then you see some of the casualties, children being brought to the hospital, and people mourning some of the dead here. So the Israeli airstrikes on Al-Mawasi came after the IDF claimed 4 of its soldiers were wounded during its operations in the Israeli-occupied side of Gaza in the southern city of Rafah, where Israel has been conducting military operations against Palestinian militants who are trapped in the area. And Israel is doing this, according to the reports, against the wishes of the U.S. So the IDF claimed that several terrorists who emerged from an underground terrorist infrastructure attacked its troops. That's the language that the IDF used there. It called the alleged attack a ceasefire violation, which is very rich considering Israeli troops have been openly conducting military operations against these trapped Palestinian fighters in Rafah, and has been really, making announcements about it. They just said the other day that they killed 40 of them so far, and then a few of them, according to the IDF, come out of the tunnels and attack, and that's the ceasefire violation, according to the IDF. And the U.S. has been pushing for Israel to grant the trapped militants safe passage to the Hamas-controlled side of Gaza, but Israel opposed the idea. And according to a report from Axios, when President Trump spoke with Netanyahu on Monday, he asked why he was killing the Hamas fighters trapped in Rafah rather than letting them surrender. And according to the report, Netanyahu said it was because they are armed and dangerous. And while Trump has not publicly criticized Israel for its repeated violations of the ceasefire deal, according to the Axios report, he told Netanyahu that he wanted him to be a better partner in implementing the agreement. Who knows if that's exactly true? This is Axios. This is Barak Ravid, the former IDF intel officer who writing this report. And, this is kind of the narrative that we've seen both from Biden and Trump, that behind the scenes, they're really so upset with Netanyahu. And I mean, this didn't say that. It didn't say that he was so upset. It said that he wanted him to be a better partner. And the report also said that he expressed concern about Israel's military operations in Syria. And that is something that Trump said publicly. Trump put out that post on Truth Social calling for Israel to be, more cordial with the new Syrian government led by the former al-Qaeda commander. But when it comes to Gaza, we haven't seen any public condemnation, any public pressure from Trump. He's just, whenever he's asked about the ceasefire deal, he says it's going great. Phase 2 is going to start soon. Everything's going wonderful. There's peace. As you can see from that video, there is not peace in Gaza. And the earlier in the day, before this escalation, the IDF killed 2 Palestinians in Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood. And Gaza's health ministry said on Wednesday that since the ceasefire was supposed to go into effect, Israeli forces have killed 360 Palestinians. So adding the 7 people killed on Wednesday brings it to 367 in less than 2 months since this so-called ceasefire went into effect. So the next one here, Bulldozed corpses, investigation of Gaza's missing aid seekers. So this is a report from CNN. And I apologize if you're watching because this is archived because CNN has a paywall now. But I just have to scroll in kind of an annoying way to read this. But this is a really important report, and it is about how the IDF, the people who were attempting to get aid in northern Gaza, that they were mowing down, that they were killing, that they were burying them in shallow graves with bulldozers. And when you talk about evidence for genocide, I think the aid killings is just some of the best evidence that Israel doesn't view Palestinians as human, the Palestinians of Gaza as human, because this is how you treat caged. I mean, it's worse than how you treat caged animals. What they did when it comes to the aid killings. So I'll read some of this report here. Again, I think it's really important. And so Ammar Wadi knew that he was risking his life when he set out to get a bag of flour for his family from an aid truck near the Zikkum crossing in Gaza in June. "Forgive me, Mom, if anything happens to me," he wrote on his cell phone's home screen. "Whoever finds my phone, please tell my family that I love them so much." Amid regular Israeli gunfire toward aid seekers this summer, Wadi never made it home, and the message he left was delivered to his family weeks later by someone who found his phone. It was the last they had heard from him. Wadi's among the dozens of Palestinians whose loved ones say they vanished near Zikkum and whose fate remains unknown. A CNN investigation now points to the Israeli military bulldozing the bodies of some of those killed near the crossing into shallow, unmarked graves. At other times, their remains were simply left to decompose in the open, unable to be recognized in the militarized area. The practice of mishandling bodies by bulldozing them into unmarked graves can violate international law, according to legal experts. CNN's review, which also found that aid seekers were killed by indiscriminate Israeli fire near the crossing, drew upon hundreds of videos and photos from around Zikkum, along with interviews of eyewitnesses and local aid truck drivers. Just some horrific accounts. Aid truck drivers saying they went in and then there's a hail of bullets on the desperate, starving people trying to get a bag of flour from the truck. The IDF shoots them with live ammunition. And this article says, what was the language there? The mishandling of bodies could be a violation of international law, but they don't say killing people trying to get food, setting things up this way. I mean, it's just so many different war crimes happening here. And CNN also spoke with two former Israeli military members who described instances elsewhere in Gaza during the war in which the bodies of Palestinians were bulldozed into shallow graves. They requested anonymity because they were not authorized to speak on the matter. And there's other places in Gaza where they found mass graves of Palestinians who were buried in very shallow dirt by Israeli bulldozers. So again, there's a lot of details in here that just absolutely horrific. And this is in northern Gaza. We had an account recently from a few months ago from an Israeli soldier speaking to Haaretz, saying in northern Gaza, his job was every day they'd set up, a spot where they, set up their sniper rifles. And when the Palestinians would come and wait for aid, they would set a line and say, okay, if they cross this line, we're going to shoot them. And that was what they did every day. And he said that he killed Palestinians, including children, in that way. So there's so much evidence of these aid massacres. All right, so the next one here, Egypt denies reaching deal with Israel on Rafah crossing. So Egypt on Wednesday denied that it reached an understanding with Israel on a deal to open Gaza's Rafah border crossing to just allow Palestinians to exit the Strip and not return. So this is a statement from Egypt's State Information Service. They said, quote, "If an agreement is reached to open the crossing, it will be in both directions for entry and exit from the Gaza Strip in accordance with U.S. President Donald Trump's plan," end quote. So Israel's coordinator of government activities in the territories, or COGAT, announced earlier in the day that the Rafah crossing would be opened in the coming days exclusively for the exit of Palestinian residents of Gaza to Egypt. Under the U.S.-backed ceasefire deal, Israel was supposed to open the Rafah crossing for medical evacuations and for travel to and from Gaza. An Israeli officer speaking to the AP said that all Palestinians who wanted to leave Gaza would be allowed to as long as Egypt agrees to receive them. And of course, the announcement from COGAT and these comments from Israeli officials about not allowing, saying anyone could leave, but they can't come back, raised concerns about Israel trying to use this crossing to pursue their goal of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Israeli officials told Haaretz that re-entry into Gaza could be permitted if Hamas hands over the 2 remaining bodies of Israeli captives that are in Gaza, and Hamas did hand over 1 body on Wednesday. I don't know if it's been confirmed yet that it was an Israeli. And Israel has controlled Gaza's Rafah crossing and its border with Egypt since launching the offensive on the city in May 2024. At the time, President Biden's White House described the attack as a limited operation, because if you remember, there's a whole lot of pressure to prevent that offensive. But now Gaza does, but Rafah lies in just complete ruin. The city has been completely destroyed. And now Israel controls every border of Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu and Likud boycott Knesset vote on Trump's Gaza peace plan. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the Knesset advanced legislation that approves President Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and members of his Likud party boycotted the vote. On Wednesday, legislation introduced by Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid passed in its first reading in the Knesset by a vote of 39-0. While no member of the Knesset voted against the motion, Netanyahu attempted to kill the legislation by having members of his Likud party boycott the vote. Lapid said, quote, "This is the first opportunity we have been given as a Knesset to tell President Trump, to tell the world, to tell ourselves that we are uniting around a common goal. Netanyahu chose to boycott the vote and not come here. It's a shame," end quote. So doesn't that kind of seem odd that Netanyahu and his party would do that when they're claiming that they support this effort by Trump, even though, I mean, realistically, this plan is just not a blueprint for any kind of real peace. But this is something Netanyahu just, does not want to fulfill. I think he is just waiting for the time when Trump says, okay, you could go back in and to the rest of Gaza and just fully restart the bombing and everything. All right, so the next one here, senators reintroduce Venezuela war powers bill. So a bipartisan group of senators has reintroduced a war powers resolution aimed at blocking President Trump from launching a war with Venezuela without congressional authorization. The bill was introduced by Senators Tim Kaine, Rand Paul, and Adam Schiff, who sponsored the previous resolution. And this time they were joined by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. And according to a press release from Kaine's office, the new war powers resolution is privileged and may be called up for a vote on the Senate floor within 10 days. I couldn't bring myself to put the quote in from Schumer here. He's saying that, only Congress has the constitutional authority to declare war, acting like he cares about that. Whatever. It's good that he's on this bill. It's just, you see so much hypocrisy with him. I mean, with these other Democratic senators too, but there's something about Schumer. So the first bill failed in a vote last month of 49-51 with just 2 Republicans, Paul and Lisa Murkowski, supporting it. Kaine has said that he expects the legislation to receive more support now that the U.S. has deployed more military assets like the aircraft carrier. And due to this controversy over the September 2nd boat strike and, which involved the second strike to kill survivors, I really am hoping that this controversy prevents war with Venezuela, makes it, maybe the administration thinks it's too risky with all this scrutiny that they're coming under. A war powers resolution, as I covered yesterday, was also introduced in the House. That is sponsored by Representative Jim McGovern, who's a Democrat, and Joaquin Castro, another Democrat. And they've been joined by Thomas Massie in sponsoring the bill. So that means it's a bipartisan resolution in both the House and the Senate. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's other... I would just kind of assume that the bill has a better chance of passing the House than the Senate, but I don't really know... I can't think of any Republicans off the top of my head in the House that would vote in favor of this. But hopefully there's a few to bring it over the line. I don't think that they'll get a veto-proof majority, that if Trump vetoes it, they'll be able to override it. But again, this is another thing that I hope, if they do pass this, that it would send a message and make the administration not take that step to launch this very unpopular war. All right, and illegal and immoral. We're a lot of times we're talking so much about the legality of things, but the morality, we need to make moral arguments as well. The U.S. just, even if they made it technically legal, the U.S. just doesn't have the right to go around and invade countries that it chooses to because they want their oil, and they don't want them to be aligned with Russia and China, or just because it's something that Marco Rubio and the demographic that he represents wants. There's just no moral justification for this war at all. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. launches a kamikaze drone squad in the Middle East. So U.S. Central Command announced on Wednesday that it was launching the U.S. military's first one-way attack drone squadron based in the Middle East as President Trump's Department of War continues to get further entrenched in the region. CENTCOM said, quote, CENTCOM launched Task Force Scorpion Strike 4 months after Secretary of War Pete Hegseth directed acceleration of the acquisition and fielding of affordable drone technology, end quote. And this came a day after Hegseth announced a program known as Drone Dominance that will involve spending $1 billion to acquire 300,000 units over the next 2 years. He said, quote, Drone Dominance is a $1 billion program funded by President Trump's big, beautiful bill, end quote. So I didn't do the math, but I'm just guessing that these kamikaze drones, which are one-way attack drones, that means that they're drones that are used one time. The drone is like the warhead, basically. It explodes, and that's that. It doesn't return. But I would just guess that the U.S. version of these drones costs way more money than the ones that you see being made in other countries. So CENTCOM said that it has already formed a squadron of what they're calling low-cost unmanned combat attack system drones and released photos of drones in its press release, and that's the drones that you see here. So these are in the Middle East, according to CENTCOM, at some U.S. base, probably in one of the Gulf countries. And so, again, this is the U.S. getting further entrenched in the Middle East, and we are seeing the Trump administration really building up its alliances with the Gulf Arab states. On Monday, CENTCOM also announced that it had opened a new bilateral command post in Bahrain, which is the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. CENTCOM said that it will be staffed by forces from the U.S. and Bahrain to be used as a hub for integrated air defense planning. This could be part of preparation for another war with Iran, building up these Gulf alliances. The Trump administration recently approved a $445 million weapons deal to Bahrain to sustain its fleet of F-16 fighter jets. The administration has also been working to build its military alliance with the Saudis. They also approved $1 billion in arms deals for Saudi Arabia to support their helicopter fleet and also to provide aviation training, which is seen as kind of the precursor to this training deal to the F-35 deal that MBS wants and that Trump says he's ready to do. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. opens an $800 million consulate compound in Erbil, Iraq. So the U.S. on Wednesday officially opened a new consulate in Erbil, the capital of Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan region in the north of Iraq. And this is said to be the largest U.S. consulate building in the world. And the compound sits on 206,000 square meters, or about 50 acres, and cost about $800 million. $800 million to build a consulate in Iraqi Kurdistan. And, of course, this is a sign that the U.S. is planning very long-term involvement in Iraq. Iraq also hosts the largest U.S. embassy in the world, which is in Baghdad, and sits on about 104 acres in the very heavily fortified Green Zone. So, these are, on paper, these are diplomatic facilities, but they're clearly more than that. And the U.S. official at this opening ceremony was a guy named Michael Regis, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. He says, I'll just read what he said at the ceremony, quote, "We have significant opportunities in the coming period to demonstrate the return on America's investment in this new consulate by delivering tangible outcomes that make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous through a partnership that delivers value for our America First agenda," end quote. I just love how they're always, citing America first when it's all this stuff, this involvement in, this is Iraqi Kurdistan. Like what do we need a huge $800 million consulate there for? One reason is that U.S. oil companies are involved and have stakes in oil fields in this area. But another thing I suspect is that this is near Iran. It's said that Israel has intelligence assets, in Iraqi Kurdistan, and that can, go into Iran from there. So again, this is something, we don't really talk about much, like the U.S., because you don't really think of an embassy or a consulate as anything more than a diplomatic facility typically. But when you see these U.S. embassies in the Middle East, again, Baghdad is the biggest. The second biggest U.S. embassy in the world is in Lebanon, which is such a tiny country, but it's a huge compound. It just really shows the presence of the U.S. of, obviously diplomatic officials, but there's also military there, and obviously intelligence is going to be very active there. It's just part of the U.S.'s big footprint in the region. All right, so the next one here, Trump sends a handwritten note to Syria's Sharaa. So President Trump sent a short handwritten letter to Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, the former al-Qaeda leader who took power in Damascus with his group of jihadists known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, nearly 1 year ago. So in this letter, very short letter, Trump said, "Ahmed, you will be a great leader and the United States will help." You could see a picture of it here. Tom Barrack, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, presented it to Sharaa here. And it also included a meeting, a picture of Trump hosting Sharaa, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, in the Oval Office. And just more, you have them where they're starting to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as like a terrorist organization. They delist HTS, even though they're going around and killing civilians in Syria, all the white minorities, and we've seen the massacres of the Druze as well. And they remove them from the list, and they welcome this guy to the Oval Office and send him nice little notes. And there's a video of Trump and Sharaa in the Oval Office, and Trump is spraying cologne on him. It's like some Donald Trump cologne, and he gives him a bottle. I mean, it's just like, it seems like it's a parody. And because, the thing is, Trump is not just lifting sanctions on Syria to give the country a chance to rebuild. He's also forming a military alliance with this guy, and there's this. Haven't seen much else since the initial report about the U.S. potentially establishing a military base in Damascus, but we'll see if that happens. But the U.S. is not planning to leave Syria, not planning to leave Iraq. I should have mentioned in the Erbil story that the U.S. is maintaining a troop presence in Erbil in the north. They moved some troops there as part of their kind of drawdown and consolidating forces in Iraq. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces raid Syria and launch fresh drone strikes on Beit Jinn. So this one is from Jason Ditz. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed conditional willingness to consider a deal with Syria. But today, and this was written on Wednesday, the IDF is back to carrying out offensive operations into the country's west and southwest. The military was active on the ground in the Quneitra Governorate, raiding the village of Ruah Hina and establishing a roadblock on a road near the village. There were as yet no reports of the IDF forces detaining anyone. And there was also some more involvement in Beit Jinn. Some drone strikes were reported here. And this is the area where last Friday they faced some resistance. Some people fired at the Israeli troops who raided the town, and then they unleashed some airstrikes and artillery fire, which killed 15 Syrians. All right, so the next one here, Lebanon and Israel hold first direct talks since 1983. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So Israel and Lebanon held their first direct meeting in decades on Wednesday, 1 year after a ceasefire agreement ended a war with Hezbollah, although, of course, Israel has continued attacks. Civilian representatives from both countries met at the UN Peacekeeping Forces headquarters in Naqoura near the Israeli border with the presence of U.S. Special Envoy for Lebanon, Morgan Ortagus. The U.S. Embassy in Lebanon said in a statement that the session was convened to assess ongoing efforts to secure a durable end to hostilities within the mechanism that oversees the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. The last time Israel and Lebanon engaged in direct negotiations was 1983. Following Israel's invasion of Lebanon, the talks led to an agreement that would have normalized relations, but it was never ratified. And of course, the U.S. has been stepping up the pressure on Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, which, could lead to a civil war in Lebanon. And we've seen threats of Israeli escalation here. But of course, this is the U.S., acting like there's some kind of mediator here when clearly they're much more favorable to one side. They have been the monitor of this ceasefire that Israel has just completely violated in every possible way, both by launching airstrikes, conducting surveillance flights constantly over Lebanon, and maintaining a military presence in areas that it was supposed to withdraw from. But maybe these, I don't know where these talks can go. I don't really know with what the U.S. and Israel are demanding, where this is really, where this could really lead to. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please check out our viewpoints. One from Norman Solomon. Democrats in Congress are out of touch with constituents on Israeli genocide. One from James Bovard. Obama paved the way for Trump's Venezuelan killings. One from Pavel Devyatkin. Central Asia doesn't need another great game. One from Caitlin Johnstone. Good old war propaganda. And our spotlight from Ted Snyder. Trump's war on democracy in Honduras. So please go check all that stuff out. Like, subscribe, comment, everything I always tell you to do. Follow us on social media. One more show this week. It's December. Christmas is coming up. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I think Christmas Eve and Christmas Day fall on a Wednesday and a Thursday. So I'm going to take both days off, have a nice 4-day weekend. So that week there'll be 3 episodes. And then the following month, sometime probably towards the end of January, we have another baby coming, number 3. So I'm probably going to take a week or 2 off then. So I have some time coming up. But anyway, that is it for me. I will be back tomorrow. One last show this week. Thanks for listening.